Hey guys, Brian here from Thumper Fab. Today I'm going to walk you through installing our bed rack on your Polaris Xpedition. For the first step of the installation, we're going to assemble the rack before mounting it to the bike. We'll start with mounting the end flanges on the top basket. Being careful to note, one edge of your main bottom of the basket will have extra holes that'll face the rear of the vehicle to accommodate the hinges if you went with the tailgate option. This flange faces the front of the vehicle, so we have less holes on this side. So we can go ahead and place it in a position. You're going to skip these outside holes for now, as you'll hang your side panels before bolting it all together. For the next step, we'll go ahead and mount our rearmost flange to the top basket. Again, noting that you'll have the extra holes located for your hinges if you went with the tailgate option. As before, you'll hold off from installing fasteners on the outer extreme-most bolt holes, as those will be used to tie in our side panels. When you're fastening your rear flange to the top basket, you'll want to ignore the two holes that are next to the light opening that would be used for your tailgate option. If you have decided to go with the tailgate option, you'll install these fasteners later on. Whenever you're installing your flanges onto your top basket, you'll want to make sure not to tighten anything up until you get all the bolts started. For the next step, we'll go ahead and install the passenger side rail that'll fit into place between the front and rear flanges we've already installed. And you'll use your fasteners to tie the end flanges together, squaring up the upper basket. For the next step, we're going to go ahead and fasten our driver's side upper basket rail to our basket assembly the same exact way we did the passenger side. For the bed rack assembly, wherever you use a carriage bolt for the assembly process, you'll install the carriage bolt through the parts, following it on the other side with a washer and a lock nut. Once you have the main setup for your basket assembled, you can go ahead and tighten everything. Remember, you were supposed to leave the bolts out on the corners and down the side rails so you can come back and install our side panels after you tighten up the basket. For the next step of our assembly procedure, we'll go ahead and mount the side panels to the upper basket assembly. You can tell which side the side panel should go on based on the round hole that's sized there for wiring in case you went with the light option. We'll line that hole up with the hole in the rear of the panel. Installing it with your carriage bolts as before, capping off with a washer and a lock nut on the back side. We tilted it up to make it easier to get to the fasteners. You'll install it the same exact way, sliding your carriage bolt down through the top basket and through your side panel before capping it off with a washer and nylon lock nut. With your side panels loosely fastened to the upper basket assembly, you can go ahead and begin tightening them evenly. With our side panels tightened up, we can go ahead and move on to mounting our front brace. This will be on the front side of the rack towards the front of the vehicle. You'll install it using our carriage bolts and washers and lock nuts as we've assembled the other parts for the rack. It's easiest if you would go ahead and mount the tailgate before mounting the rack on the vehicle. We'll start with the hinges and then move on to the strut assembly and finally the tailgate itself. The installation procedure for your tailgate mounts and strut mounts is the same for both sides, so we'll show you the right side. With your bed rack prepped for the tailgate installation, you'll install your strut mount as well as your latches before installing your tailgate onto the rack. Once you have your strut mounted to the outside of the tailgate, you can now install your latch assembly. You'll remove the Phillips head screw and lock washer. Install it through the tailgate with the gasket installed. Reinstall the anchor and finish it off by reinstalling the hardware. Once you have your tailgate mounted on the rack, you may have to do some adjustment of your latch assembly to reduce any rattling and properly shut the tailgate. With all your hardware attached to the tailgate, you can go ahead and move it on to mounting it to the rack. You'll have 4 M10 bolts with nylon washers. You'll put the nylon washers in between the tailgate assembly and the hinge. Be careful not to over tighten, as it'll make the strut overwork for opening and closing the tailgate. With your tailgate mounted to the hinges, you can go ahead and lift the tailgate up and mount the struts to the mounts installed on the tailgate and the rack itself. To prevent scratching of your powder coat, we've provided some rubber trim. You can use the tailgate as a template to see where to cut, so you know just about how much to apply. You'll trim it and pull the paper off the back before installing on the back side of your tailgate to prevent any scratching of the rack. Another option we've provided for your Xpedition bed rack is 6-inch slim lights that would mount in the upper rack. We have a pair of the 6-inch slim lights here. You'll use the hardware and brackets in the box to mount it to your upper rack. And once you get it on the bike, we have a harness with a switch that you'll run through the bike into the dash. Here we have a bag of the hardware that's contained in your 6-inch slim light box. You'll use the black brackets to mount it to your upper rack, as well as the hardware provided in the kit. For the first step, you'll mount the black brackets to the lights before assembling it all on the upper rack. For the first step, you'll mount the black brackets to the lights before assembling it all on the upper rack. Before you install your bed rack on the unit, you'll pull this rubber stopper out and slide in our Lock and Ride Max fasteners into the bed rail to allow you to bolt the rack down to the provided rail. For fastening the bed rack down to the bed rail, use your M8x14 flange head bolt. You'll tie it off on all 4 corners, including the bolts in the middle. With your mounting bolts tight, you can go ahead and move on to wiring the lights if you selected that option. We'll show you how to run the wires. So here we have our wiring harness laid out for your lights on the bed rack, as well as a pigtail to plug into your pulse bar. Here on the wiring harness, you have your Deutsch connectors for the 6-inch slim lights. You have your relay, your feasible link, and your interior switch. The first thing you want to start with is plugging in the Deutsch connectors to the slim lights on top of the rack. Once you plug in your slim lights with your Deutsch connectors, you'll begin to run the wire down the bed rail frame into the cab and connect it to the pulse bar in the front before mounting your switch inside the dash. Once you've plugged in your Deutsch connectors to your lights, you'll begin to route the wiring inside of your cab, making sure to avoid any hot components or rotating materials. With your harness laid out on top of the rack, you'll plug in your Deutsch connectors for your 6-inch slim lights and begin to zip tie the harness to the top of the rack before running it down the columns of the rack. With your wiring cleaned up on the top of your rack, you're ready to run your wires through the cab to the hood to get ready to plug into the pulse bar. You'll pull your wires through the grommet in the firewall and find an open slot in your pulse bar to prepare for plugging it in. To make the routing of the wiring harness through the firewall easier, we fished a fish tape through the firewall, taped our pigtail to it, and are preparing to pull it through the firewall. With your ring terminals pulled through the firewall, you'll use some snips to cut the ring terminals off and use butt connectors to connect your pulse bar pigtail to the wiring harness. With your pulse bar pigtail wired into the harness, you'll remove one of the slots and plug in your pigtail. With your harness plugged into the pulse bar, now all that's left is to pick a slot for your switch, run the wires behind the dash, and plug in your switch. With your switch in place and your lights all wired up, you're ready to hit the trails.